"This is it," Sarah said, her voice heavy with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She forced a smile for Matthew's sake. "We're finally here, safe." As the trees opened up, the lake house came into view. It was larger than Sarah had expected, a towering, two-story structure with peeling paint and sagging shutters. The roof pitched steeply, and ivy crawled up the stone foundation. Despite its weathered appearance, it looked like a sanctuary. Matthew glanced at her, his brows furrowed. "Why is Daddy so mad at us?" he asked softly, clutching his teddy bear closer. Sarah's heart tightened. She parked the car and turned to face him, brushing a strand of his hair from his forehead. "Daddy's been through a lot, sweetheart," she explained gently. "He just needs some space right now." Sarah stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The air was colder here, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Matthew followed her closely, his small hand clutching hers tightly as they approached the front door. The porch creaked under their weight, and the faint outline of cobwebs glistened in the corners. Sarah's heart raced as she bent down and lifted the corner of the tattered rug by the door. There it was, a single, rusted key. She hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the door with trembling fingers. The heavy wooden door groaned as it swung open, revealing a cavernous interior cloaked in shadows. The air inside was cool and carried a faint mustiness, as though the house had been holding its breath for years. Sarah fumbled for a light switch, and after a moment, a dim chandelier flickered to life above them. The light revealed a grand entryway with high ceilings and a sweeping staircase. Dust clung to every surface, and the wallpaper was faded and peeling, but the house felt solid, inviting even. Matthew's voice broke the silence. "It's big," he said, his eyes wide as he took in the space. "It is," Sarah agreed. She glanced around, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but the house remained silent. They explored the first floor cautiously. The living room was dominated by a stone fireplace, its mantel adorned with dusty picture frames. The kitchen was outdated but functional, with a wide window overlooking the lake. Upstairs, they found 2 bedrooms, each furnished with heavy wooden beds and wardrobes that creaked ominously when touched. In the hallway, Sarah paused before a closed door. She felt an odd chill as she reached for the handle, but when she opened it, she found only an empty study lined with bookshelves. A single chair sat by the window, its back to the door, as if someone had been sitting there moments before. She closed the door quickly and turned back to Matthew. "Let's get some rest," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll finish unpacking in the morning." Downstairs, Sarah bolted the front door and pulled the curtains closed. She set up a small cot for Matthew in the living room near the fireplace, where she could keep an eye on him. As he drifted off to sleep, she sat near the fireplace, unfolding the letter from her great uncle. The handwriting was slanted and slightly faded, but legible. "Dear Sarah, the news has a way of traveling. I've heard of your troubles and know you need a helping hand. This house has been empty for a while, and you are welcome to stay here as long as necessary. The keys are under the rug. Rest easy, and know you're not alone. Warm regards, Harold." Sarah closed her eyes alongside Matthew as she kept thinking why she couldn't remember much about Harold. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the tattered curtains of the lake house, casting long, pale beams across the dusty floors. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her fingers curled around a steaming cup of tea. She hadn't slept well. Every creak and groan of the house had felt amplified in the stillness of the night. Matthew, however, seemed unfazed as he sat on the floor nearby, busying himself with an old box of wooden blocks he'd found in one of the closets. "Mom, who's Harry?" he asked suddenly, stacking 2 blocks together. Sarah glanced up sharply. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. Matthew shrugged. "I heard someone say it last night, a man's voice. He said, 'Don't worry, Harry's here.'" Sarah's stomach tightened. "You must have dreamed it," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "This house is old. It makes a lot of noises." Matthew frowned but didn't argue. He turned his attention back to the blocks, humming softly to himself. "Who are you talking to, buddy?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. He turned to her, his face serious. "The boy outside," he said matter-of-factly. "He said his name is Sam." Sarah crossed the room quickly and pulled him away from the window. "There's no one out there, sweetheart," she said, peering outside. The lake was still, the surface unbroken except for the occasional ripple of a breeze. Matthew looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "But I saw him. He waved at me." Sarah's mind started to get an uneasy feeling as she guided him back to the living room. She tried to distract him with a snack and a cartoon on her phone, but her nerves were frayed. Something about this house was odd. While cleaning the living room, Sarah caught movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow flitting past the window. She froze, her heart pounding, but when she looked, nothing was there. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the lake turned to glassy black, Sarah's unease turned to outright fear. While locking up for the night, she caught a glimpse of something moving in the water, a head peeking out, dark and shadowy, before disappearing beneath the surface. Her breath hitched, and she pulled the curtains closed with shaking hands. "Mom? Are you okay?" Matthew called from the living room. "I'm fine," she said, her voice thin. "Let's get ready for bed." But she wasn't fine. Her mind raced as she lay awake that night. Every sound of the house, the groan of the wood, the whisper of wind against the windows, making her flinch. She had to get them out of here. Whatever sense of safety the lake house had offered was gone. The next morning, Sarah looked up in her phone for the closest hotels. She had enough. They will stay at a hotel for a couple nights. As she zipped up the last bag, a sharp ringing noise startled them both. Sarah turned her head toward the sound, an old rotary phone hanging on the wall near the kitchen. Her breath caught. She hadn't even realized the house had a working phone. The ringing persisted, echoing through the empty space. Slowly, she rose to her feet and hesitated before picking up the receiver. "Hello?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice, deep and calm, crackled through the line. "Sarah, it's Harold." She exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against her chest. "Thanks for the invitation letter, I guess." Sarah didn't want to sound impolite or question him, as she would never see her great-uncle in life. A chuckle came through, warm but oddly distant. "Word travels," he said simply. "I meant to call you sooner. I hope the house has been treating you well." Sarah turned her gaze toward the dark hallway beyond, where the floorboards still creaked, as if unseen feet wandered through the space. She swallowed. "It's old," she admitted. "There have been some difficulties." She paused and lowered her voice. "Matthew says he heard even voices." Harry was quiet for a beat before responding with a mysterious soft giggle on his lips. "That house has its own stories," he said finally. "It's been standing for generations. You'll hear noises, I won't lie to you about that. But my dear child, mostly it's the pipes groan, the floors shift, and the wind plays tricks on the mind. But there's nothing to fear. The house isn't against you." Sarah wasn't sure why, but his words relieved her. Although she added, "I don't know if we should stay. Maybe this was a mistake." "I'll visit you soon," he interrupted. "We'll talk. Give it a little time. I promise, things will settle." Sarah hesitated. There was something in his voice, something oddly reassuring, yet filled with a weight she couldn't quite place. The days passed quietly at the lake house, and the eerie unease seemed to fade. Sarah started to believe they could settle here, at least for a little while. Matthew, full of energy, wandered the grounds, his smile returning. One morning, as he sat on the porch clutching his teddy bear, he asked, "When is Harold visiting us, Mom?" Sarah smiled faintly, relieved he'd taken to him so well. "Soon, I hope. He said he's nearby." Matthew grinned and went back to tossing pebbles toward the lake, but Sarah couldn't shake a creeping sense of dread. That afternoon, the crunch of gravel startled her from her thoughts. She froze, peeking out the window to see a truck pulling up. Her stomach dropped. It was Grant. He stepped out. his posture tense, his military jacket wrinkled and stained. His eyes scanned the house like a predator. "No," she whispered, locking the door as panic set in. "Matthew," she called, rushing to him and pulling him inside. "Go upstairs and stay in your room, no matter what." Matthew nodded, scared but obedient, and disappeared upstairs just as the pounding on the door began. "Sarah," Grant bellowed, "open up." She opened the door just enough to see him, blocking the entrance. "You need to leave, Grant." He ignored her, his face twisting with anger. "You think you can hide my son from me? Where is he?" "He's not safe with you," Sarah snapped, her fear momentarily giving way to anger. "You're not well, Grant. You need help." Grant shoved past her, storming through the house. "Matthew," he shouted, his boots echoing on the wood. "Where's my boy?" Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. A cold draft swept through the house, carrying with it an eerie silence. Grant stopped, his body tense as his eyes darted around. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. The faint sound of an evil laughter echoed through the house, distant and chilling. Grant spun around, his face pale. "Who's there?" he barked, his bravado cracking. Sarah felt the cold too, her breath visible in the sudden chill. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of her vision, and the faint laughter grew louder, closer. Grant's confidence dissolved, replaced by wide-eyed fear. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Sarah," he stammered, backing toward the door. "But I'm not—" A loud crash from upstairs cut him off. Grant flinched, his eyes darting toward the staircase. The shadows seemed to deepen, the room growing darker with each passing second. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the threshold as he fled. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, trembling. "Matthew?" she called out weakly, dragging herself to her feet. "Matthew, where are you?" She searched the house frantically, her voice breaking as she called his name. But the house was silent, empty. The panic clawed at her chest as she opened every door, looked under every bed, and checked every closet. "Matthew!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. She ran outside, scanning the woods and the lake. "Matthew!" But he was gone. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Sarah stepped into the police station, clutching her coat tightly around her. The air was stale, and the faint odor of coffee and paper filled the room. Her hands trembled as she approached the desk, desperate and on edge. The officer behind the counter barely glanced at her, his eyes heavy with boredom. "I need help," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "It's about my son. Ma'am, you'll have to wait your turn," the man interrupted, scribbling on a pad without looking up. Sarah bit her lip, her frustration mounting. She couldn't wait. Not anymore. "Brad!" A voice boomed from the back of the room. A tall, stocky man emerged, his uniform crisp, but his demeanor anything but welcoming. His face lit up in mock surprise when his eyes landed on Sarah. Well, if it isn't Sarah, didn't think I'd see you around here." Sarah froze. It was Brad, Grant's old friend. His reputation had always made her uneasy, and now, standing before him, she felt her stomach churn. "It was you gave up my location." Sarah took a pause, then in a more calm sense added, "I'm here because I need help," she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. Brad leaned casually against the desk, his smirk dripping with condescension. "Help? You're lucky I don't call child services right now, losing the child in the bright daylight." Sarah's heart plummeted. What are you talking about? I'm just trying to find my son." Sarah's hands balled into fists at her sides, her fear igniting into fury. But before she could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Brad, what on earth are you doing?" The female officer's voice was sharp and authoritative. Michelle, her badge glinting under the harsh lights, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at Brad. "Did you just threaten this citizen?" Brad's smirk faltered. "It's not what it sounds like," he muttered. Michelle folded her arms, glaring at him. "Sure sounded like a threat to me. And if I hear another word of this nonsense, you'll find yourself at the paperwork desk till next Christmas." Sarah felt a rush of relief, though her fear still lingered just beneath the surface. Michelle turned to her, her expression softening. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" Before Sarah could respond, the door to the station creaked open. Sarah turned, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Matthew. "Matthew!" she cried, rushing to him and scooping him into her arms. She clung to him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Where were you? How did you get here? I've been looking everywhere for you." Matthew hugged her back but looked calm, almost serene. "I'm okay, Mommy," he said softly. "Harold brought me here." It took a while for Sarah to explain the situation to the officer. One of the officers at a nearby desk overheard and stood up, almost laughing, his brows furrowing. "Huh, don't say you live in the house from the end of Oak Street?" he asked, almost laughing. "Wait, did you just move into that house?" Another officer added a lineup question. "Wrap it up, guys, it's just a house," Michelle interrupted, then glanced sharply at the officer. "You meant Harry Burton? That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "Harry Burton died over 20 years ago. Anyways, how are you related to that bastard of Harry?" Sarah kept silent. She didn't want to reveal who she really is to Harold. And who was Harry? The thoughts kept running in her head. The way this police officer spoke about him. Is there something she should know? "Thank you, officers. We should get going." Sarah tried to sneak out from the station. Michelle looked busy herself as she added the final thoughts before disappearing in her busy afternoon paperwork. "Ma'am, I don't know who sold you this house, but Harry Burton is 6 feet under the ground for sure. And if he would have a brother, this town would know it too. There is no Harold Burton. Maybe you are being catfished. How about I'll bring Matthew ice cream in the evening? I want to glance at that old house myself." "Sorry, I can't. My hands are tied. We are talking about my career here. I know I owe you." "Okay, we do it tonight. I'll figure something out." The library was an imposing structure, its tall windows filtering gray light from the overcast sky. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, the faint scent of old paper and polished wood hanging in the air. Sarah sat at a long oak table, her fingers tracing the edges of a crumbling newspaper from 2 decades ago. Matthew, her young son, sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, flipping through a colorful picture book, blissfully unaware of the grim discoveries his mother was making. Sarah's heart thudded as her eyes scanned the brittle pages. She had spent the afternoon combing through city archives, trying to piece together the dark history of their new home. At first, the librarian had been hesitant to give her access to the older, less organized records. But after a little pleading and a mention of the strange occurrences at the house, the elderly woman had reluctantly shown her the back room where the old newspapers and records were stored. There was no record of Harold at all, only a few columns about local friendly fisherman Harry. Then, Sarah found something shocking. She was reading an article from 20 years prior, the headline chilling, "Tragedy Strikes Suburb, Local Man Unalives Family." The black and white photograph below the headline showed a modest 2-story house, eerily familiar. It was her house. Sarah recognized the man from the newspaper as she would see his face in old albums held in the attic. Her great-uncle was a murderer? The whole town couldn't believe it, but facts proved otherwise. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized that this entity, or ghost, or whatever it was, pretended to be her great-uncle. Harold never existed. But why? To lure Sarah into this house? In case she already would know the truth about what her grandfather did? Sarah immediately grabbed Matthew's hand and they both ran out of the library, not glancing back for a second. Sarah's hands trembled as she shoved clothes, documents, and Matthew's favorite stuffed bear into a fraying duffel bag. The house seemed heavier today, the air thick with an unsettling tension that pressed down on her chest. Matthew sat cross-legged on the living room floor, clutching his tablet, his small face pale but calm. a calm that only masked his growing fear. "We have to go, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice breaking. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway froze her in place. She looked out the window and her stomach dropped. A black sedan pulled up, followed by a patrol car. Out stepped Grant, his hulking frame towering as he slammed the car door shut. Behind him was Brad, along with two other officers whose faces were cold and unreadable. Matthew's voice quivered. "Mom, who's that?" "Stay close to me," Sarah whispered, pulling him into her arms. The front door burst open with a thunderous crack, sending splinters flying across the entryway. "Sarah Caldwell!" Brad's voice boomed as he marched inside, flanked by his officers. His tone was sharp, rehearsed. "You're under arrest for child abuse. Hands behind your back." Grant stepped forward, a twisted grin on his face. His eyes darted to Matthew. "Give me the boy, Sarah. You've done enough damage." Sarah backed away, holding Matthew tightly. "Please, stop." Grant lunged forward as he tried to pull out Matthew from Sarah's warming hands. A low, guttural groan echoed from the walls, and then chaos erupted. Lamps flew off tables, books hurled themselves from shelves, and furniture lifted inches off the floor before crashing down violently. One officer stumbled backward, shouting curses as a dining chair narrowly missed his head. "What the hell is going on?" Brad yelled, drawing his firearm. Grant ignored the chaos and made a beeline for Matthew. He grabbed the boy's wrist and yanked him toward the door. Matthew screamed, but his cries were drowned out by the deafening roar of the house's fury. Suddenly, an unseen force grabbed Grant, wrenching him away from Matthew. His body was flung back into the foyer as if an invisible hand had swatted him aside. The front door slammed shut with a resounding bang, locking itself. The house fell silent for a split second, only to erupt again as every loose object fell to the floor with a cacophonous crash. The officers panicked, scrambling for the door, their composure shattered. Brad's face was pale as he clawed at the doorknob. "Open the damn door!" he barked, but the house wouldn't let them leave. The oppressive atmosphere grew heavier, suffocating. Grant was furious. Rising to his feet, he spotted the old axe mounted above the fireplace, a relic from Sarah's great-uncle Harry. Grant grabbed it, hefting its weight with a grim determination. He smashed the net race doors. Officers ran towards their car, but not Grant. He was obsessed. He wasn't done yet. Sarah heard the voice again, the same low, whispering voice that had guided her before. It was calm, yet commanding. "Run! Take the boy upstairs! Hide!" Sarah didn't hesitate. Grabbing Matthew's hand, she darted toward the staircase. Grant turned just in time to see them disappear up the steps. "Sarah, you can't hide!" he bellowed, his boots thudding against the floor as he followed. His axe scraped against the banister, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. "You'll never take Matthew from me." Upstairs, Sarah shoved Matthew into the bedroom closet and crouched down with him, pulling the door shut. Her heart pounded as she held him close, her arms like a shield around his small frame. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. She closed her eyes and covered Matthew's ears as the sound of the axe smashing against the door grew louder and more menacing. "Come out, Sarah!" His voice was a guttural roar now, unhinged and terrifying. The axe splintered the wood with each swing, sending shards flying into the air. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she tightened her grip on Matthew. "Don't look," she begged him. "Don't listen." The axe continued its relentless assault. The door began to give way, the jagged hole growing larger. And suddenly, silence. Sarah held her breath, her entire body trembling. The silence stretched on, oppressive and unnatural. She opened her eyes just enough to see the faint glow of moonlight through the closet's slats. The axe lay discarded on the floor, its blade slick with something dark. But Grant was nowhere to be seen. Sarah crawled out of the closet, her limbs trembling like a newborn fawn. Her eyes darted around the room, half expecting Grant to burst from the shadows. But the silence remained unbroken, save for the faint rustling of the wind outside. Her gaze fell on the axe, lying in the center of the room like an abandoned sentinel. something about it drew her in. A strange pull, both terrifying and irresistible. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against the cold steel. She grabbed it. The sky blazed with hues of orange and crimson as the sun sank low on the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the backyard. Sarah sat on the cool grass, her arms wrapped around Matthew, who leaned into her side. His small fingers toyed with the edge of a wildflower he had picked, twisting the fragile stem as though it were a secret he held tightly. Beneath the towering oak tree, a simple tombstone stood, freshly placed and etched with the name Harry. It was unassuming, just like the man, or rather the ghost, who had quietly guided them through their darkest hours. Sarah's eyes lingered on the stone, her voice soft but steady as she spoke. It doesn't feel right, does it? That the world will never know who he really was, all the good he did, all the sacrifices he made. Matthew glanced up at her, his young face serious, lips pressing together in thought. But we know, Mom. That's enough, isn't it? A small, bittersweet smile tugged at Sarah's lips. She kissed the top of his head, brushing a strand of his sandy hair out of his eyes. Yes, sweetheart, it is. She paused, her gaze fixed on the tombstone. The wind stirred through the oak's branches, rustling the leaves in a gentle, melodic rhythm. For a brief moment, Sarah thought she felt something, an invisible hand on her shoulder, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone. She exhaled slowly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. As the sun slipped below the horizon, casting the world into a peaceful twilight, Sarah whispered, "Thank you, Uncle Harry. Wherever you are, I hope you found the peace you deserve." Matthew placed the wildflower at the base of the tombstone, its yellow petals glowing faintly in the fading light. Together, they sat in the quiet, the world around them soft and still, their hearts filled with gratitude for the ghost who had given them a chance to start anew.